Francisco, how are you? Or am I on mute?
I'm good, Ben. Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, good.
See you?
You never know with these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to see you. Getting a little here we go. That was a good meeting with Danielle the other day. She really appreciated it.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, she seemed really genuinely interested in the process.
She is, and she has some pet peeves, and I was trying to assuage her that we were looking into them, but I think she wanted to hear it from the coach.
Yeah. Well, hopefully she's a little more comfortable with where we're at, where we're going.
Yeah, I think so.
Good, good.
Okay, one more minute or two. Who do we have here?
Hey, Ben. Hey, Francisco.
Hello.
Oh, Ryan, how are you? And Francisco, will you be able to make your screen larger for us?
Yeah. Is it not appearing like full screen for you?
Not for me.
Okay.
Got some black borders.
All right. Like that? That kind of larger?
Yes.
Okay. Let me.
Yep, that's good. That's good.
Oh,
Let me just. The Teams is a little different setup than the WebEx. So I just need to make sure I don't lose all of you as I switch to that presentation mode.
oh, I see. Okay.
Which it kind of wants to, for whatever reason, it wants to do. But we've got a couple of minutes. I can figure that out.
Sure.
Evening. This is Chuck. How are you?
Hi, Chuck. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. Sorry, I dialed in just a minute early here. I was having a little tough time with my Wi-Fi, but I'm all set now. I'm going to mute.
Okay. And Marge said she was not going to be able to make it tonight. That's the only person I've heard of who can't make it. So I'd say whenever you're ready, Francisco, take it away.
Okay. Still trying to figure out what's going on with my screen share, why I can't both project the presentation and see you folks at the same time. But I may just have to focus on the presentation and trust that you're all with me.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're always with you.
All right. Great. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. We have a fairly straightforward agenda this evening, and before I jump into the presentation, we did have someone who I believe tried to join us at last month's meeting, and because we're on Teams now and not WebEx, which is evidenced by the fact I'm struggling to both share my screen and see you. We had someone that had difficulty joining the meeting, a member of the public. So Carlene, I spoke with her earlier today, and hopefully she's been able to at least dial in and hear. And as a reminder, this meeting's being recorded. We'll post a recording of it to the town website. I'll provide the recording to the town for them to put online. And also, if for whatever reason, if you're listening and you happen to be using a computer that does not have a microphone or a camera, you can select, as you go to log in, you can select join by phone option. You can click that button and you can dial in. And in the meantime, it should let you on your computer, let you at least see, you can see the meeting, see the presentation, even if you aren't able to participate via your camera and phone through the computer itself. You should be able to hear it through your phone and at least see the presentation on the computer. Okay, so just for anyone struggling to get into the meeting and that happens to be on the phone, try clicking on the link again, try joining the meeting, and on the bottom right corner, there should be an option for phone audio, and click on that. That should let you into the meeting on your computer, and at the same time, you can audio on your phone. And I hope that works for you. We're trying our best, and I'll speak with Gail in the land use office about potentially reverting back to the WebEx format if we need to for future meetings. Keith was the one that knew how to do that, so that kind of got lost a little bit in the shuffle here, but if we need to go back to that platform, we will. So that being said, I had someone else who just joined us. I had to just escape out of my presentation and let them in, but I believe we now have everyone in the meeting. So I will go back to my presentation. You know what, let me try doing this. And if I do this, can you see my full screen now? Does everyone have a full view of the screen?
It looks like a full screen to me. Yeah.
It's
Okay.
better. Yeah,
All right. Let's not mess with anything. Let's run with it.
great,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. I believe you each received a record of the document, record of amendments document, what we kind of call a change log is our working terminology for it. That was sent out either late last week or on Monday. And that is, if you've had a chance to look at it, you'll see that it's a pretty useful reference, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So we'll start with talking about that. And then I've had some very good feedback from your zoning enforcement officer, Candy, and she brought up some issues surrounding parking lots, roofed over space, ADUs, and roofed over space as relevant to ADUs as well, landscape contractors, and so I'd like to take some time to talk about those items. And then open up to any comments that you might have if you've had an opportunity to take a little more time to review the draft regulations, any questions or comments on any other items, and then really talk about our next steps, how we can move this thing forward. So as a reminder, we're still in phase 1, and we're in the process reformatting these regulations, although I think we're getting very close to being done with that reformat. And so our next steps would be to move these draft regulations towards adoption. And there are a few things that we need to do first, and we'll talk about that before we close out the meeting. So the record of amendments, it provides a reference, a guide that helps someone who's familiar with the old regulations and where to find things and how they're organized. It helps them transition to the new regulations. It helps. There are a few different components of this. It starts with a section guide. So if you knew where something was in the prior regs, or what are your existing regs right now, in that section, you can find where it's located, where its home is in the new, or in the draft regulations. So that's the function of that. We also have a very brief table on sections that were eliminated and an explanation as to why those sections were eliminated. And there were only a few. That is followed up by regulatory amendments. So where we've made changes that actually impact what is allowed, how much of what is allowed, how it is allowed, whatever that might be, we've documented that to the greatest extent possible and have provided that record in that table. And then finally, we have a table that documents all of the new or revised definitions. So this is about as comprehensive as we could be, documenting the changes, considering that the entire document's been reshuffled, reorganized, and a lot of wording has been changed. Most of that wording is for clarity, and really just to get things up to date. Not all of it actually impacts what is permitted, and so we're not documenting every change, every use of which to that, or that type of change, or Oxford commas, that sort of thing, even though those were made throughout the document. Any questions on the purpose of this document? Any comments?
No, I think it's a handy reference.
I think it's a very good reference.
Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to go into the specific language that we're using for structure height. Would this be the time to talk about that, or not be the time to talk about that?
You know what? Let's keep our agenda somewhat fluid. So if it's on your mind right now, let's talk about it.
Okay, under the structure height section, the amendment guide.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that we define adjacent grade, and we define the manner in which we measure height.
Okay.
In a shoreline community, it's extremely important that we do that. Most zoning regulations, are very specific about where you measure grade, how you measure grade, whether it's existing grade, whether proposed grades can be considered. Yep. And most regulations consider an average of the grade, whether it's proposed or existing, at both sides of the house. It also defines whether other appurtenances are included in the height, such as chimneys, projections, and other type things. So I raise that here because it isn't referred to, obviously, in the general nature of the amendment guide, but keep that in the back of your mind, because I'll bring it up again as we work our way through the language and the regulation change. And I'll leave it there for now.
Very good. Thank you. I've noted that, and I'll take a look at it this week. Okay, any other comments or questions surrounding the record of amendments? And if you'll excuse me, we have someone that's trying to join the meeting. I see Carlene is trying to join. I'm letting her in. Hopefully she made it. Carlene, hopefully you made it in the meeting. I just let you in, so I'm glad to see that you're here. Okay. All right. So there are no other comments or questions on this. We can move forward. All right. So getting on to comments and questions from the CEO, parking lots came up, and it was brought to my attention that parking lots are not explicitly identified as a principal use, which I think I knew that already, but I wasn't sure that would be an issue for you. That the regulations do not currently identify them as a principal use, only as an accessory use to a principal use. And so the question is, and as my understanding, there may be an application before you for something of this nature.
I think it's moments away.
Okay. The question is, do you as a community, is this something that you intended to permit? Is it something you want to entertain, or is it something you oppose? And should we leave the regulations as they are, or revisit this?
I have no idea why it was left out. I don't know the backstory, but I would think we want to regulate standalone parking lots, get it in there.
Yeah, I agree, Ben. I think we probably should.
So the idea being you have a parcel of land, wherever it may be, you can build it out with just a parking lot. There doesn't need to be a building or a use on it. And then maybe maybe you have a business next door, it's a different parcel, or maybe you lease it to somebody for them to use, another property owner. Is that the idea?
I don't know. I mean, we just can't have another, take three buildings down and put in a parking lot just for the sake of a parking lot with no businesses attached to it. So it's gonna have to be carefully constructed.
And the question is whether or not this is something we want to tackle now or in the next phase of the work.
Right.
Yeah, I would say, this is Fred, I would say in the next phase, and I would really question whether we want parking lots as a principal use, but
Okay.
leave that for phase 2.
I do think it's worthy of some real discussion and consideration to think about the potential impacts,
Yeah,
the
you're right.
benefits, and to even maybe engage a larger group of people in this discussion, in this conversation.
Would this also include parking garages?
Good question.
Potentially.
I
do
think,
not
as Fred said,
currently. Yeah, go ahead.
it's definitely for the next phase.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it should include parking garages, because I think this issue came up when the major development proposal was pending downtown. I think the issue of parking garages came up.
Okay. All right, we'll put it on that list, and that list is growing of phase 2 items. Okay, so we're not ignoring it. We're just emphasizing the importance to give it the attention that it needs and to accomplish that through phase 2.
And I think you identified the issues, whether
Yeah.
whether it's offsite for another use, whether it's offsite for commercial purposes, whether it's offsite for a specific use, all of those issues come into play, whether it's a garage or
Sure.
a grade lot.
Sure. Okay. Very good. All right. Let's move forward. Roofed over space. So this one's a little bit complicated, and it can be subject to interpretation. I think, as it is right now, I think there's one way to interpret it, but it's arguable. The issue being here, as it was presented to me, this was related to an ADU, and the attic space of the ADU, every square foot of that was being counted as roofed over space, basically adding to the gross floor area of the unit, which therefore then had a sort of a ripple effect affecting the ratio of what's allowed with respect to ADU to principal dwelling unit, which we'll talk about in a moment. So I don't want to go too far down that line of thought as of yet, but it is very, very directly related. So I highlighted the 2 sentences that I want to draw attention to. So as I mentioned, this is mainly an issue surrounding accessory buildings, because if you look at what is considered a roofed over space in the principal building, and that would be the first sentence at the top, it's every floor under a roof which has structural headroom of 6 feet 6 inches or more. So that would include an attic, provided you have 6 feet of 6 inches of clearance, and it would just be that space that has that clearance that would count as roofed over space, which affects, your gross floor area and anything that's based upon how much total area you can have for purposes of density calculation and other types of calculations. Now, you'll notice for an accessory building, the area of every floor under roof is counted as roof over space. So attic, dwelling floors, etc. But there's no caveat about that only being applicable to floors with a clearance of 6 foot 6 inches. So all that space under the roof, under the eave, approaching the eaves, where you have a foot or two of clearance, where you typically stick a box or something of storage, is being counted towards the area of an accessory building, of which accessory dwelling units would be included, which in turn makes that structure look a lot bigger than it otherwise is in terms of usable space.
Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
No. So the question is, do we now, do we have broad agreement that this roofed over space should really only be 6 feet 6 inches as applied to all structures, not just principal buildings, but also accessory buildings? Do we have agreement on that? And if we don't, why not?
I agree.
This is Ryan. I would agree.
Nobody else?
I'm thinking.
Well, hardly makes sense to define a principal building one way and an accessory building the other.
Yeah, and Rusty, that our one and only ADU special use permit, he brought this right up. I mean, he was talking about this very fact and how it was burdensome without the 6 foot 6 clearance issue included.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean,
And I agree as well.
Okay.
You can see that part of the intention of including attic space, by example, and there I highlight in the second sentence highlighted, whether or not a floor has been laid. You can see that the intention is that if you have enough clearance, then potentially in the future you could very easily add a floor to that space, and then that could be functional space that would then, after approved and built, would add area, add livable space that was not otherwise approved. So that it does make some sense to include an attic, even if it doesn't have a floor, because of its potential. But to me, only if it has clearance, only if you could stand in the space, right?
yeah. I think that makes perfect sense for all the reasons you stated. Yeah, my only question is this a phase 1 change or phase 2? I think we could do it at phase 1. It looks like an oversight.
Yes. Agreed. And Rusty was also bringing up new building specs with insulation. That, what was his, how did he put it? If he had to insulate up to R80, was it, for his floors? Is that the new reg? And he was bumping up into, it would have to be a gigundous joist in order to accommodate that.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
So one of the things a requirement like this pushes you towards is trying to build something with a cathedral ceiling, so that you don't have that attic space at all.
And that was his rub, is he had no storage space.
Right, and then you have no storage space and a cathedral ceiling, and you might be referencing the requirement for cathedral ceilings require an R value that is incredibly high.
Yeah.
And that may be what you're referencing, which in turn requires some pretty massive structural roof elements to accommodate all that insulation,
Mhm.
or spray foam is the case many times. All right, so what do we think? Do we think we can accomplish this in phase one? And my test of this is anyone going to be upset by this? Is anyone going to be upset at not being included in the discussion about making a change like this? And that's kind of been my litmus for whether or not we do it now or in the next phase.
Well, if you think that people are now being hamstrung by counting every space under a roof in an accessory building, then I can't imagine any objection to loosening it. Might not be the right term, but loosening that up to space that's got the proper clearance. Can't see a complaint about that from anyone, really.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right, well,
I agree.
good. Let's move forward with it. I feel comfortable as well. I think it's a reasonable change to make, and it may have just been, as you had mentioned, it may have just been a kind of an oversight in the wording, and that resulted in this. All right, next. So this leads right into ADUs. And Candy brought up a couple of items. First of all, ADUs right now are only allowed curb cuts on corner lots, but she noted that they're not specifically allowed on through lots, which are really in many ways have something in common with a corner lot, in that they abut two streets. And it may be advantageous for an ADU that's built to a rear of the lot, of a through lot, to have access from the street that's on the back side of the through lot, instead of going all the way through the street that the principal structure is fronting. So for that purpose, it seems reasonable to allow for an additional curb cut if it's on another roadway belonging to, or that a through lot abuts.
Could it be narrowed to say one but not both? In other words, you either have access on the front of the property or the rear, or one side or the other in the case of corner lots, but not both.
I think the idea would be to potentially allow up to 2 curb cuts.
Yes.
And it would just need to ensure that, so we're talking about ensuring those are distributed, right? That you
Right.
can have one on each side, but not 2 on one road.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
I think
Yes.
the idea is to avoid having 2 separate driveways coming out on the same road,
Yes.
10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 feet from each other.
Makes
Sure.
sense.
So I think that's
Either or,
not more
Okay.
than two.
but not both.
Okay. I think
Yeah.
we have language in place that allows for corner lots, that exempts corner lots. And I think I would probably just borrow from that language and include it within there, and ensure that, right, it's.
I can see where a through lot that might not have adequate side yard for a driveway would have a very difficult time, creating that driveway, and it would be a better layout if it were able to access a separate drive in the rear. So
Mhm.
I think it's good to have that flexibility, but I don't think that in that case, if it could also access the front road, that you would want both for the ADU,
Right, right.
either or.
Yes.
Okay. So I will take a look at that and propose some language, and we can review that next month. All right, very good. All right, the next one, and this very well might be a phase 2 discussion. Should the ADU area limit of 33% of the total floor area of the primary residential structure be increased? Is that too strict of a limit? And so basically what this says is that if you want 1,000 square foot ADU, you have to have a 3,000 square foot principal residence, which does not include the area of the ADU. So you've got 3,000 square foot of primary residence plus a 1,000 square foot ADU. That's the ratio at work. In many of the communities in which we work, that is 50%, so that you could have a 2,000 square foot primary residence and 1,000 square foot ADU. At that ratio, the primary residence is still clearly predominant or primary, which is why we call it that. And the ADU is still clearly subordinate at that ratio. I don't know if this is a problem. You see this as an issue, or maybe it's a non-issue, but it definitely came up, and in part as related to the roofed over space issue that we just resolved.
Correct.
That making this even more challenging.
I think Keith came up with this number. I don't know quite how, but in our first permit application, the owner had to add a large additional room onto his house to get enough size for his ADU. So it does seem restrictive to me.
Was that, Ben, specifically because of the inclusion of space that was under 6 feet 6 inches?
I don't remember that.
Yeah.
It may have been. It may
May
have been.
But 50% sounds more logical to me. That may be why we've only had one application because of this number.
I think it really precludes development on a lot of properties.
Yeah, I think it's
If you have-
restrictive. Yeah.
Yeah, if you have a small home, 1,500 square foot home, that means you could only do a 500 square foot unit, which you could do a studio unit 500 square feet, and even some 1-bedroom units. So it's feasible, it's possible. The question is whether or not this strict of a ratio is really necessary to protect the principal residence as the predominant residence, to maintain that subordinate relationship, whether this ratio it's necessary at 33% versus something higher at 50.
Yeah, this is Ryan. I think it's restrictive as it is. I don't know if everybody would agree to 50%, or if it's something we needed to discuss further, but I mean, the 50% that you said other areas makes logical sense to me.
You're governed by the maximum coverage on the lot, correct?
Right,
Yeah.
and you still have other controls in place, exactly, that will, absolutely, yeah.
I think the overcrowding is covered by the maximum coverage, and it is overly restrictive.
Does 50% sound good to everybody?
Does it make a difference whether it's a freestanding unit or a unit that's encompassed within the primary residence?
Yes. Is an ADU a freestanding unit?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what, I don't have an answer to that, but, you know, I just wonder if we need a different standard for the freestanding ADUs, of which we've seen one, versus the units that are encompassed within the primary residence. No?
Right.
Okay. I'll withdraw the question.
And this is an issue, if we feel this is not an urgent, something that we should urgently correct, this is an example of another issue we could put in front of the community as well, and as part of our phase 2 work.
Let's do that.
I don't want to clog up the phase 2 with a lot of. Seems like we should be able to decide this one tonight, but or on our own before phase 2. Because there are going to be some heavy duty items in phase 2 that I think are going to be
There will.
time consuming.
Yes. Okay.
Would be one.
Francisco, what's the state? You know, the state has that. Do you know what it is for the states? The percentage? What their recommendation is?
Good question.
I need to revisit this, the legislation. I haven't looked at it in a little while. But you opted out.
We
Correct?
did,
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm up for pushing this out a month, but I'd rather not push it out to phase 2 if we could.
Do you really want to keep pushing things out a month? I mean, we'd like to get
So
to
50, well, let's talk about what 50% looks like a little bit. On a 2,000 square foot, 2-story house, if you were able to build out the entire basement, which you wouldn't be able to do because of mechanicals and that stairwell and that sort of thing, you would be short of achieving 50%, right? Because you've got one floor and you've got 1,000 feet on each floor above, and you can only do one floor. But you could definitely exceed 33% by building out a basement. Likewise, if you have a 2,000 square foot, 2-story colonial home, and you build a wing off the back, and it's a 1-story wing, and it has the same footprint as the house, takes up the same amount of space on the ground, but it's only 1 story. Well, that's 50% of the principal structure. And to me, that's, when you go beyond 50%, that is kind of a logical tipping point for the subordinates, what is clearly supposed to be the subordinate structure, the ADU,
Right.
where it starts to look like a second structure, and it does start to become a 2-family house, which I think the intention is to allow an ADU, but not to allow something that might resemble a 2-family home. And I think 50% is a very logical limit. That being said, the 1/3 is not uncommon either. And if you were to do a survey of the ADU regs in Connecticut right now, which there really aren't all that many, it will be somewhere between 33 and 50% ratio, with very, very few communities allowing something higher than 50%.
Do I hear 45%?
42.5.
Our current regulation hasn't stimulated a lot of activity, so it makes me think that it may be overly restrictive, so.
I was going to say, given that it's been 1, I think we go with the 50%.
Yeah.
I go with the 50%.
Yeah, I mean,
It
it's
just makes sense, I think, to me.
It does make sense, and you have a number of other safeguards in the regulation that
Yeah.
would prevent overcrowding, so.
right.
Right. Fred? What happens,
Let's do
Fred?
that. I think it's a very defensible number. It's rational and defensible. And I certainly, I think it's a very conservative approach. Right. Yeah. Okay. So I will make that revision. Is there another comment or question on that?
Well, do we lose Fred? Or what do you think, Fred?
Oh, I said, okay.
Oh, you did? Okay, I missed that. Yep, let's move on. Thank you.
Good, good. Next, should ADRB continue to review ADUs? And this might be a question for them as to whether or not they're interested in continuing to review ADUs. That's the way what is currently required. And are there opinions about whether or not that is necessary?
I think we should ask them. It's they just do commercial at the moment, correct?
Right. So, Candace's question to me is, well, why are they, I know we set it up like this, but why are they, if their focus is commercial and a few other things that the zoning regulations ask them to do,
Right.
why do they need to review ADUs?
I don't remember how that snuck in with Keith.
Is it, do you suppose, an attempt to ensure that ADUs fit with the principal building on a lot?
Probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense unless they want to review residential structures too. But I don't think
Right.
they want to do that.
Well, reaching out to ADRB has been on my list for a little while, about not just about this. We talked about their review of some other items as well, like citing and things like that. So let's pose that question to them. Maybe this was foisted upon them, and that they really could care less about reviewing these types of applications. That, as mentioned, they have only potentially seen one. So I will work with Gail and Candace to set up a line of communication with them, and let's put this in front of them.
Great. Makes sense to me.
Okay.
It almost seems prejudicial to me, though.
Prejudicial? What do you mean?
Can you discriminate against ADUs?
Well, I mean, why? Why would you do that? I just,
Well, that's the question.
it just seems like it's makes it more difficult to do it. And, as opposed to going to a contractor, getting a canned set of plans, going in and getting a zoning permit, getting a building permit and doing it. It just seems to add an extra step to this. And that's just another reason why nobody's doing it. And if we want to, well, I'm not saying we want to promote it, but if we want to make it doable, maybe that's one of the reasons why it isn't. If it's
One more hurdle. Yeah.
something that's going to enhance affordable units. I know that isn't, what we're really trying to do here, but it would certainly do that. That would be advantageous. And maybe one of the reasons why we've only got one application is because you've got to hire an architect, you've got to hire an engineer, you've got to get a survey. All of those things are expenses and steps that are intimidating to a homeowner who never goes through a process like that. And we see it all the time. And it isn't. I'm sorry, that's my local phone here, and I apologize for that. But it just seems to me like that's an extra step that we may want to carefully consider. I'm not convinced that it isn't a good idea, but I'm not convinced that it isn't also, you know, a bias towards ADUs that we maybe don't want to put into the process. I'm not opposed to going to the design review board and getting their opinion. But to me, on the surface, it seems like an added step that adds a lot of expense, a lot of extra effort, and is it necessary? I guess that's my question. Is it necessary? What purpose does it really serve?
Oh, good question, Chuck.
Yeah, good point.
I don't have the answer. So yeah, we should start with asking them.
I don't think that any of those steps necessarily make it a bad project. It probably does come out better with that sort of planning, having an architect and a surveyor and a civil engineer involved in things like this generally makes them easier to execute and probably in the long run a better project. But I'm not so sure that a lot of builders can't provide the same advice. So I don't know. I guess I'm rambling. Maybe you had the right idea in asking what the design review board thinks as a first step.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let's do that. Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Chuck. Next item, contractor yards. You don't currently within the existing regs, nor within our draft regulations, are contractor yards identified as a permitted use. And as I understand it from Candace, that this is an enforcement issue for her. So there are no landscape contractor yards or just regular contractor yards for that matter. If you're, I don't know, site development contractor, you've got a backhoe and some equipment, and you've got a garage and you park it in a yard with trench box and a few other things. You don't specifically permit that use in any district. It's presumably allowed or tolerated in your manufacturing districts. But this appears to be a major oversight, and it's something I hadn't even picked up on until Candace had brought it to my attention. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that, and what your experience has been with that in town.
We did allow one at the corner on Alpha Avenue.
Yes.
Not too long ago, and I didn't realize that they're not permitted.
What district would that have been?
That's sort of a mixed use, and we've got municipal buildings behind it, and we've got the municipal yard. For the trucks and what have you beside it. So
okay.
it's but then we've got residential across the street.
But it had been a gas station.
Well, yeah, and it was not maybe, I don't know, you call it a higher use, but it didn't hurt.
Right.
And
So it was a gas station, and which is likely or was a non-conforming use in the district in which it's currently located. And
probably.
Yeah.
if you move to a less non-conforming use, that's usually tolerated.
And he was just storing his own equipment there. He wasn't,
Okay.
fixing cars. He was just storing his lull and some staging
Right.
planks and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Hasn't done much with it either.
He's cleaned it up. It looks better.
Okay.
A little bit. I guess we should consider where we want them,
Yes.
for sure. And I don't know whether it's this phase or the next phase.
You start opening up to landscape contractors and other types of home occupations that are similar, a home builder,
Yep.
a plumber. I think there's other factors that come into play when you start introducing contractors and allowing it, as an accessory use in a or residential zone? I think it's a bigger question.
Well, we haven't yet we haven't yet discussed as to what zones they should be permitted in. And you bring up an important point about residential zones. In some communities in which I've worked, because they've had a lot of local landscape contractors, they actually permit them in a residential zone with some pretty strict regulations surrounding that. Where equipment can be parked inside or outside. Screening, fencing requirements, a special permit requirements. So a lot of guardrails around it. And typically that's reserved for landscapers, not other types of heavy contractors. So you could treat them differently, or you could treat contractors all the same, in which case you could also just restrict those to your commercial zones or manufacturing zones.
Yeah, which would be my preference.
Yep.
Because
we did.
You've got the guy with a pickup truck and a lawnmower, and then you've got some of them with 6 dump trucks, and it covers the waterfront, I think.
Well, we also did already allow 1 commercial truck parked.
Correct.
So we are allowing a self-employed guy to have his plumbing truck in his driveway.
Exactly,
But
or
not
his landscape trailer.
Right,
His
but not
right.
necessarily his backhoe and his
Exactly.
brush hog, and yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Where you draw the line.
Those brush hogs.
I think this discussion is an indication that it's a phase 2.
Yeah, it's definitely a phase 2. I would agree.
But maybe Francisco, you could come up with some wordage from some other communities
I'm
in
happy to
Connecticut.
do that. Yeah.
And I'll be leaning towards commercial property only for a contractor.
Likewise.
Yeah. There's just, you get too far in the weeds with
Residential
property.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Very well. Good. Okay. So that takes care of the comments and questions that Candace had brought before me, which means I'm happy to open it up to any other comments and questions about the draft regulations as they stand. There have not been any substantial revisions over the past month, so you have the most up-to-date version. So are there any loose items, anything that's caught your eye that you'd like to discuss?
Well, I would be in favor of getting this stuff in front of the public and holding a meeting.
Yeah,
Great.
agreed.
Well, that's my next slide, is what that potentially looks like.
Well, I have some other, I have a couple of topics before we get there.
Please.
Should we somehow try to reword our construction near the coastal construction? Either pushing it back from the floodplain levels and wave action sites, just to get ahead of sea level rise and the frustrations we've been encountering with our regulations versus state regulations, or state the DEP giving us suggestions, but we can't necessarily stand behind them.
Well, because every time we try, we get sued and we have to cave.
Right. So should we be hardening up our regulations?
Yeah, but not here, Ben, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think this is the right place to do that.
Right. I mean, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, should we have that conversation in phase 2?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just adding to Francisco's.
Yeah. Okay.
Phase 2 shouldn't take more than 8 to 10 years.
And then while I'm whacking hornet nests, short-term rentals, how we have the authority to do something if we so choose, which would definitely be a phase 2, but do we want to even approach that or leave the ordinance as voted on alone?
If we don't do it, I don't know who's going to do it. select men, women, whatever, are not anxious to take that on.
No,
So I think, you know, I'm wasn't on the board at the time, but I don't know why we ducked it the first time. And our reward is we've got them on every street corner. So I think we have to tackle it.
oh boy, okay.
Oh, boy.
Well, Francisco, your buffer for workshops just went up 2 nights.
I've no doubt, no doubt. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
That was it. Those are 2 biggies from me. Help me,
All
Clyde.
right. Yeah. Well, they're biggies. So is right. Yeah. Okay.
I just want to make sure they're on everybody's horizon and
Yeah.
plate, that we aren't just kicking that can further down the road.
So we do, and this moves us forward to our next slide, I guess.
Okay,
We do need to share the draft because you're a coastal community. We do need to share the draft regs with Deep for their comment, review and comment. And it may be that they're flagging items within the existing regs that need attention from their perspective. So they may be bringing a sense of urgency to addressing some of these issues, which
okay,
doesn't necessarily mean we need to accomplish that in the first phase. And I could communicate what our process is to them when we in the transmittal. But you'll likely have some support from them in addressing that issue.
good.
Okay.
They usually take a long time.
Yes. Yeah.
So as much time as we can give them, the better.
Right. So our very next steps are to make revisions based upon our discussion this evening, which really there's not a lot here. And potentially what I could do is make those revisions sooner rather than later, circulate that revised document with all of you. And so we don't have to wait a full month to take a look at those. You can take a look at them while they're fresh in your mind, and provide me with any comment that you might have. And we're still soliciting ideas for graphics that might be beneficial within the regs. I'll do one final review for anything that we could potentially add to help communicate some of these ideas. But if anything jumps out at you to you as really requiring or benefiting from some sort of illustration, please let us know, and we'll develop something. As I mentioned, we do want to get some other eyes on this regulation, these regs. So we want to share them with ADRB and ZBA for their comment. And once we have comment back from those bodies, we can, as early as May, but I'd really like to do it in May if we could, by the end of May, share the draft regulations with both your COG and Deep for review, which, depending on the length of their review, and Deep might take a long time. Once we get some sort of comment from them and we can respond accordingly, we can bring it to public hearing for adoption, which at the earliest would be June, and that, as it is likely ambitious.
Are we likely to make changes, phase 1 changes, as a result of a review by Deep and whatever the other organization is, or is that going to work into phase 2? I mean, if Deep comes in with suggestions on how to tighten up shoreline development regulations, I think we're going to have to do that in phase 2. I don't know whether other interests they might have, but I wonder if we share this with them with the thought that whatever feedback we get will be a phase 2 development, and we can move ahead with getting the public involved in what we've done so far.
Mhm.
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, just thinking out loud, I wonder. I mean, anything drastic, anything substantial, is going to
Right.
have to be phase 2, and particularly when it involves the shoreline or short-term rentals or some of those really
Right.
hot items.
Yep.
So I wonder if we could.
I agree.
do
That's well said.
sort of a simultaneous thing and move ahead with involving the public in what we've been doing.
That's an incredibly important point or even idea that you brought forward, Fred. I admittedly, I have not yet been through the deep process because it's the first time we're doing zoning work for a coastal community, a comprehensive rewrite that requires the deep process. We're working with Fairfield right now, but we're a little further behind, so we haven't submitted yet for deep review. So I'm not entirely familiar with how detailed they get and their response and level of review, and also how long their process might take. So I can, what I'll do this week or next is I will reach out to Deep and have a conversation with them about what their process looks like, and also talk about maybe, given the fact that we have a multi-phase process, bringing that to their attention and kind of floating the idea of them taking the time they need for a thorough review, calling out any deficiencies that they might see that we intend to address in phase 2, while kind of getting their blessing to move forward with what we have for a phase 1 adoption. So let me explore that a little bit.
Should FEMA be added to the list?
Yeah.
Should what be added?
FEMA.
Well, I was held on. Chuck, I had another idea with sharing draft regulations. We probably should show it to our floodplain engineer, right? The subcontractor. And then as well as our coastal resiliency committee that's been formed.
Mhm.
No, but not if we're not making significant changes. I mean, for the same reason, I wouldn't encourage Deep to make comments on this phase, because it's just going to drag it out for months, I think.
Well, Francisco should do his homework and get back to us whether it will drag it out.
Yeah.
Right.
Good point,
Right.
Fred. That's a good point.
But yeah,
Right.
And I agree with Fred that this has to be put in front of the public.
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So both the SC cog and deep review are required whenever you make any substantive zoning revisions. Those reviews are mandated. SC cog is mostly their primary task is to ensure that the changes made in Stonington aren't adversely impactful to surrounding communities. So they have the job of notifying communities and making sure that you're not locating an industrial zone on the border of town next to a single family residential district. I mean, that sort of change is their big concern. So with our revisions, it's required. It's a matter of courtesy in some ways. I don't expect there would be anything objectionable to them.
No.
And that could in turn be a pretty quick review on their part. But deep, I admittedly, I need to find out more.
But getting back to the ones within town, I think we need to show it besides those two organizations, those two committees.
Oh,
Well, At the very least, ADRB, we talked about the importance of reaching out to them on accessory dwelling units, a couple other items. I think it would be a courtesy to share it with them and of course, ZBA as well. So those bodies make a lot of sense to me. Say, hey, here it is. Provide us with any comments, questions you might have. A 30-day, maybe a 30-day window to review and provide comment.
How about the Coastal Resiliency Committee?
Well, once again, we
Same
really
here.
haven't addressed, we haven't made any modifications that are
Okay.
impactful
That'll be after
in that
phase 2.
area. And,
Okay.
and I think your Coastal Resiliency Committee, any consulting engineers the town has on for floodplain related issues. I think we really need to engage those folks in our phase 2 work, particularly
Okay.
if we want to entertain any changes to the regulations in those areas. But
Okay.
right now, there's really not, it's just, hey, we still have the same regs. Any comment?
True. Okay. So I
Right.
just don't want to exclude them in going in the future. Reviewing.
Yeah.
That's fine. Phase 2 is fine.
Okay. All right. So our next meeting is May 24th at 7 p.m. As I discussed in the interim, I will get you the revised draft based upon some of the decisions we made this evening. And if I have any information to share with you about our process as related to DEEP, I certainly will do that. We'll get that distributed. And I really think we need to use our next meeting to make some decisions about when to potentially schedule a public hearing. And I need to check our scope too, because I believe we may be scoped to do a public presentation outside of the public hearing. With the idea being we're just going to inform the public, hey, this is the process we've gone through. These are the types of changes we made. This is why we're doing it. And this is what we will be bringing to a public hearing. And that approach usually provides kind of a relief valve for the public hearing itself. That way you're not bringing it in front of everyone on the same night. You're potentially holding a vote on it.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
It just
Yeah, good
relieves the
idea.
pressure quite a bit.
Great.
And so we'll need to make some decisions around scheduling those things.
Okay.
Right.
A question for Ben. What's the drill for getting meeting space? And how much lead time do we need for that?
I'll have to check with Gail.
Yeah,
That has to go through the Board of Ed, who owns that building.
yeah. Well, is that enough? Is that big enough for this kind of a change? I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, I raised the question because there's
Yes.
a lag every time we need space or.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what's I think you jump right to the high school after that space.
Yeah, and
Sure,
I'm not sure there's enough people interested.
Anything in between, we're overcrowded at the Board of Ed or looking
Yeah.
small at the high school. So I'll ask around. That's a good question.
Okay.
All right, everyone, that concludes our meeting this evening, which
Okay. We're going home early tonight?
you get to go home early tonight. Yes. So thank you, everyone, for just marching right through it as you always do. I appreciate it, and we're making very good progress. Let's keep it moving.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Let us know about DEEP. I'm curious if they want
Right.
6 months or 6 weeks. It'd be interesting.
Right.
Okay. Good night.
Thanks, Francisco.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone. You're welcome. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.